Welcome to Slothful Slumber, the podcast where we transform the vast knowledge of the internet into a gentle lullaby for your mind. I'm your host, Luna Dreamwell, and I'm here to guide you on a journey to tranquility through the soothing cadence of Wikipedia articles. Each episode will delve into the most wonderfully mundane and sleep-inducing topics, helping you drift off into a realm of serene dreams. So find your comfortable space, close your eyes, and let the dull hum of information carry you into a restful slumber. Now, let's embark on tonight's voyage of tranquil learning as we explore a topic so peacefully uneventful it just might whisk you away to the land of dreams. This Wikipedia article is titled Spartacus. Spartacus, Greek Spartakos, circa 103 to 71 BC, was a Thracian gladiator who, along with Crixus, Gannicus, Castus, and Ennomaus, was one of the escaped slave leaders in the Third Servile War, a major slave uprising against the Roman Republic. Little is known about him beyond the events of the war, and surviving historical accounts are sometimes contradictory. All sources agree that he was a former gladiator and an accomplished military leader. This rebellion, interpreted by some as an example of oppressed people fighting for their freedom against a slave-owning oligarchy, has provided inspiration for many political thinkers and has been featured in literature, television, and film. The philosopher Voltaire described the Third Servile War as the only just war in history. Although this interpretation is not specifically contradicted by classical historians, no historical account mentions that the goal was to end slavery in the Republic. Early life. The Greek essayist Plutarch describes Spartacus as a Thracian of nomadic stock, in a possible reference to the Maedi tribe. Appian says he was a Thracian by birth, who had once served as a soldier with the Romans, but had since been a prisoner and sold for a gladiator. Florus described him as one who, from a Thracian mercenary, had become a Roman soldier, that had deserted and became enslaved, and afterward, from consideration of his strength, a gladiator. The authors refer to the Thracian tribe of the Maedi, which occupied the area on the southwestern fringes of Thrace, along its border with the Roman province of Macedonia, present-day southwestern Bulgaria. Plutarch also writes that Spartacus's wife, a prophetess of the Maedi tribe, was enslaved with him. The name Spartacus is otherwise manifested in the Black Sea region. 5 out of 20 kings of the Thracian Spartacid dynasty of the Cimmerian Bosporus and Pontus are known to have borne it, and a Thracian Sparta, Spartacus, or Sparadokos, father of Sothis, the first of the Odrysae, is also known. One modern author estimates that Spartacus was 30 years old at the time he started his revolt, which would put his birth year circa 103 BC. Enslavement and escape. According to the differing sources and their interpretation, Spartacus was a captive taken by the legions. Spartacus was trained at the gladiatorial school, Ludus, near Capua, belonging to Lentulus Batiatus. He was a heavyweight gladiator called a murmillo. These fighters carried a large oblong shield, scutum, and used a sword with a broad, straight blade, gladius, about 18 inches long. In 73 BC, Spartacus was among a group of gladiators plotting an escape. About 70 slaves were part of the plot. Though few in number, they seized kitchen utensils, fought their way free from the school, and seized several wagons of gladiatorial weapons and armor. The escaped slaves defeated soldiers sent after them, plundered the region surrounding Capua, recruited many other slaves into their ranks, and eventually retired to a more defensible position on Mount Vesuvius. Once free, the escaped gladiators chose Spartacus and 2 Gallic slaves, Crixus and Ennomaus, as their leaders. Although Roman authors assumed that the escaped slaves were a homogeneous group with Spartacus as their leader, they may have projected their own hierarchical view of military leadership onto the spontaneous organization, reducing other slave leaders to subordinate positions in their accounts. Third Servile War. The response of the Romans was hampered by the absence of the Roman legions, which were engaged in fighting a revolt in Hispania and the Third Mithridatic War. Furthermore, the Romans considered the rebellion more of a policing matter than a war. Rome dispatched militia under the command of the praetor Gaius Claudius Glaber, who besieged Spartacus and his camp on Mount Vesuvius, hoping that starvation would force Spartacus to surrender. They were taken by surprise when Spartacus used ropes made from vines to climb down the steep side of the volcano with his men and attacked the unfortified Roman camp in the rear, killing most of the militia. The rebels also defeated a second expedition against them, nearly capturing the praetor commander, killing his lieutenants, and seizing the military equipment. Due to these successes, more and more slaves flocked to the Spartan forces, as did many of the herdsmen and shepherds of the region, swelling their ranks to some 70,000. At its height, Spartacus's army included many different peoples, including Celts, Gauls, and others. Due to the previous social war, 91 to 87 BC, some of Spartacus's ranks were legion veterans. Of the slaves that joined Spartacus' ranks, many were from the countryside. Rural slaves lived a life that better prepared them to fight in Spartacus's army. In contrast, urban slaves were more used to city life and were considered privileged and lazy. In these altercations, Spartacus proved to be an excellent tactician, suggesting that he may have had previous military experience. Though the rebels lacked military training, they displayed skillful use of available local materials and unusual tactics against the disciplined Roman armies. They spent the winter of 73 to 72 BC training, arming and equipping their new recruits, and expanding their raiding territory to include the towns of Nola, Nuceria, Thurii, and Metapontum. The distance between these locations and the subsequent events indicate that the slaves operated in 2 groups commanded by the remaining leaders, Spartacus and Crixus. In the spring of 72 BC, the rebels left their winter encampments and began to move northward. At the same time, the Roman Senate, alarmed by the defeat of the Praetorian forces, dispatched a pair of consular legions under the command of Lucius Gellius and Gnaeus Cornelius Lentulus Clodianus. The 2 legions were initially successful, defeating a group of 30,000 rebels commanded by Crixus near Mount Garganus, but then were defeated by Spartacus. These defeats are depicted in divergent ways by the 2 most comprehensive, extant, histories of the war by Appian and Plutarch. Alarmed at the continued threat posed by the slaves, the Senate charged Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome and the only volunteer for the position, with ending the rebellion. Crassus was put in charge of 8 legions, numbering upwards of 40,000 trained Roman soldiers. He treated these with harsh discipline, reviving the punishment of decimation, in which 1/10 of his men were slain to make them more afraid of him than their enemy. When Spartacus and his followers, who for unclear reasons had retreated to the south of Italy, moved northward again in early 71 BC, Crassus deployed 6 of his legions on the borders of the region and detached his legate Mummius with 2 legions to maneuver behind Spartacus. Though ordered not to engage the rebels, Mummius attacked at a seemingly opportune moment, but was routed. After this, Crassus's legions were victorious in several engagements, forcing Spartacus farther south through Lucania as Crassus gained the upper hand. By the end of 71 BC, Spartacus was encamped in Rhegium, Reggio Calabria, near the Strait of Messina. According to Plutarch, Spartacus made a bargain with Cilician pirates to transport him and some 2,000 of his men to Sicily, where he intended to incite a slave revolt and gather reinforcements. However, he was betrayed by the pirates, who took payment and then abandoned the rebels. Minor sources mention that there were some attempts at raft and shipbuilding by the rebels as a means to escape, but that Crassus took unspecified measures to ensure the rebels could not cross to Sicily, and their efforts were abandoned. Spartacus's forces then retreated toward Rhegium. Crassus's legions followed, and upon arrival built fortifications across the isthmus at Rhegium, despite harassing raids from the rebels. The rebels were now under siege and cut off from their supplies. At this time, the legions of Pompey returned from Hispania and were ordered by the Senate to head south to aid Crassus. Crassus feared that Pompey's involvement would deprive him of credit for defeating Spartacus himself. Hearing of Pompey's involvement, Spartacus tried to make a truce with Crassus. When Crassus refused, Spartacus and his army broke through the Roman fortifications and headed to Brundusium with Crassus's legions in pursuit. When the legions managed to catch a portion of the rebels separated from the main army, discipline among Spartacus's forces broke down as small groups independently attacked the oncoming legions. Spartacus now turned his forces around and brought his entire strength to bear on the legions in a last stand, in which the rebels were routed completely, with the vast majority of them being killed on the battlefield. The final battle that saw the assumed defeat of Spartacus in 71 BC took place on the present territory of Sinercia, on the right bank of the river Selle, in the area that includes the border with Oliveto Chitra up to those of Calabrito, near the village of Quaglietta, in the high Selle Valley, which at that time was part of Lucania. In this area, since 1899, there have been finds of armor and swords of the Roman era. Plutarch, Appian, and Florus all claim that Spartacus died during the battle, but Appian also reports that his body was never found. 6,000 survivors of the revolt, captured by the legions of Crassus, were crucified, lining the Appian Way from Rome to Capua. Objectives. Classical historians were divided as to the motives of Spartacus. None of Spartacus's actions overtly suggest that he aimed at reforming Roman society or abolishing slavery. Plutarch writes that Spartacus wished to escape north into Cisalpine Gaul and disperse his men back to their homes. If escaping the Italian peninsula was indeed his goal, it is not clear why Spartacus turned south after defeating the legions commanded by the consuls Lucius Publicola and Gnaeus Clodianus, which left his force a clear passage over the Alps. Appian and Florus write that he intended to march on Rome itself. Appian also states that he later abandoned that goal, which might have been no more than a reflection of Roman fears. Based on the events in late 73 BC and early 72 BC, which suggest independently operating groups of escaped slaves and a statement by Plutarch, it appears that some of the escaped slaves preferred to plunder Italy rather than escape over the Alps. Legacy and recognition. Toussaint Louverture, a leader of the slave revolt that led to the independence of Haiti, has been called the Black Spartacus. Adam Weishaupt, founder of the Bavarian Illuminati, often referred to himself as Spartacus within written correspondences. In communism. In modern times, Spartacus became an icon for communists and socialists. Karl Marx listed Spartacus as one of his heroes and described him as the most splendid fellow in the whole of ancient history, and a great general, noble character, real representative of the ancient proletariat. Spartacus has been a great inspiration to left-wing revolutionaries, most notably the German Spartacus League, 1915-18, a forerunner of the Communist Party of Germany. A January 1919 uprising by communists in Germany was called the Spartacist Uprising. Spartacus Books, one of the longest-running collectively run leftist bookstores in North America, is also named in his honor. The village of Spartak in Donetsk Oblast, Ukraine, is also named after Spartacus. In sports, several sports clubs around the world, in particular the former Soviet and the Communist bloc, were named after the Roman gladiator. In Russia, FC Spartak Moscow, a football club, FC Spartak Kostroma, a football club, PFC Spartak Nalchik, a football club, FC Spartak Vladikavkaz, a football club, HC Spartak Moscow, an ice hockey team, Spartak St. Petersburg, a basketball team, Spartak Tennis Club, a tennis training facility, WBC Spartak Moscow, a women's basketball team in Ukraine, FC Spartak Sumy, a football club, Spartak Ivano-Frankivsk, a football team, Zakarpattia Uzhhorod, a football club formerly known as Spartak Uzhhorod, Spartak Lviv, Spartak Kyiv, Spartak Odessa, a football team competed in the 1941 Soviet War League, Spartak Kharkiv, a football team competed in the 1941 Soviet War League. In Bulgaria, FC Spartak Varna, a football team, OFC Spartak Pleven, a football team, PFC Spartak Plovdiv, a football team, Spartak Sofia, a defunct football team, in Serbia, FK Spartak Subotica, a football team, FK Radniki, several teams, in Slovakia, FC Spartak Trnava, a football team, TJ Spartak Mijava, a football team, FK Spartak Vrable, a football team, FK Spartak Banovce nad Bebravu, a football team, in other countries. Spartak Stadium, disambiguation. Barnt Green Spartak FC, an English football team. Spartak Cape Verde, a Cape Verdean football team. FC Spartak Sime, a Kazakh football team. Spartacus's name was also used in athletics in the Soviet Union and communist states of Central and Eastern Europe. The Spartakiad was a Soviet bloc version of the Olympic Games. This name was also used for the mass gymnastics exhibition held every 5 years in Czechoslovakia. The mascot for the Ottawa Senators, Spartacat, is also named after him. In popular culture, film. The film Spartacus, 1960, which was executive produced by and starred Kirk Douglas, was based on Howard Fast's novel Spartacus and directed by Stanley Kubrick. The phrase, "I'm Spartacus," from this film has been referenced in a number of other films, television programs, and commercials. Television. Fast's novel was adapted as a 2004 miniseries by the USA Network, with Goran Visenjic in the main role. One episode of 2007 to 2008 BBC's docudrama, Heroes and Villains, features Spartacus. The television series Spartacus, starring Andy Whitfield and later Liam McIntyre in the title role, aired on the Starz premium cable network from January 2010 to April 2013. The History Channel's Barbarians. Rising, 2016, features the story of Spartacus in its second episode entitled Rebellion. The fifth series of sitcom Outnumbered had Ben Brockman's, Daniel Roche, play Spartacus in a musical called Spartacus. Spartacus appears in the season 6 premiere of DC's Legends of Tomorrow, portrayed by Sean Roberts. He is abducted and eaten by an alien. Literature. Howard Fast wrote the historical novel Spartacus, the basis of the 1960 film of the same name. Arthur Koestler wrote a novel about Spartacus called The Gladiators. The Scottish writer Lewis Grassic Gibbon wrote a novel Spartacus. The Italian writer Raffaello Giovagnoli wrote his historical novel Spartacus in 1874. His novel has been subsequently translated and published in many European countries. The German writer Bertolt Brecht wrote Spartacus, his second play, before 1920. It was later renamed Drums in the Night. The Latvian writer Andrejs Upits, in 1943, wrote the play Spartacus. The Polish writer Halina Rudnicka, in 1951, wrote a novel Uczniowie Spartakusa, Spartacus's Disciples. The Reverend Elijah Kellogg's Spartacus to the Gladiators at Capua has been used effectively by school pupils to practice their oratory skills for ages. Amal Donkol, the Egyptian modern poet, wrote The Last Words of Spartacus. Max Gallo wrote the novel Les Romains Spartacus. La Révolte des Esclaves, Librairie Artem Fayard, 2006. In the Fate Apocrypha light novel series by Yuichiro Higashide, Spartacus appears as a berserker-class servant summoned by the Red Faction. In the anime adaptation of the novels, Spartacus is voiced by Satoshi Tsuruoka in Japanese and Josh Tomar in English. This version of Spartacus would also appear in the mobile RPG Fate Grand Order. Ben Kane wrote the novels Spartacus, The Gladiator, and Spartacus, Rebellion in 2012. Music. The Spartacus Overture was written by composer Camille Saint-Saëns in 1863. Love Theme from Spartacus was a hit for composer Alex North and has become a jazz standard. Spartacus, 1954, first staged in 1956, is a ballet with a score by Soviet-Armenian composer Aram Khachaturian. In 1975, Triumvirat reached the apex of their commercial success with the release of Spartacus, a classic prog rock album. Australian composer Carl Vine wrote a short piano piece entitled Spartacus from Red Blues. Phantom Regiment's show, Spartacus, was the championship show of the 2008 Drum Corps International season. Jeff Wayne released his musical retelling, Jeff Wayne's musical version of Spartacus, in 1992. Video games. In Age of Empires, The Rise of Rome. Expansion For Enemies of Rome, Spartacus the Campaign, has the player fighting against Spartacus's army. In Spartacus Legends, Spartacus appears as an endgame boss. In Gladihoppers, he appears as a playable character in the Spartacus War, if the player chose the Spartacus Rebellion mode. If the player names the character in career mode Spartacus, the player will receive Spartacus's sword. Board games. In the expandable miniature wargaming system, Heroscape, Spartacus appears as a unique gladiator hero, having been rescued by the Archkyrie Einar before his death. Places. Spartacus Peak on Livingston Island in the South Shetland Islands.